New Mexico Territory, 1875. Under the merciless desert sun, a weathered Apache man stands on the gallows, a noose around his neck. His crime? Stealing bread to feed his 3 hungry children after drought had devastated his people's lands. The frontier town watches in solemn silence as the hangman reaches for the lever. Justice here is swift and unforgiving. But just as death seems certain, a solitary figure pushes through the crowd, Sarah Holloway, a respected widow whose testimony will change everything. What truth does this woman hold that could save a condemned man? What connection binds these two souls from worlds that rarely meet with understanding? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The aroma of fresh bread filled the small bakery as Sarah Holloway pulled another batch from the brick oven. Dawn had barely broken over Copper Springs, the light just beginning to paint the dusty main street in hues of amber and gold. At 42, Sarah wore her years with quiet dignity. Her once auburn hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines etched around eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow in equal measure. She placed the loaves on the cooling rack and absently touched the silver locket hanging at her throat. Inside was a portrait of Thomas, 5 years gone now. Sometimes she could barely recall his face without opening it, and that frightened her more than the isolation of widowhood. "Morning, Mrs. Holloway," called Abigail Porter as she entered, the small bell above the door announcing her arrival. "Smells like heaven in here, as usual." "Good morning, Abigail. The usual today." Sarah wiped flour-covered hands on her apron. The locket swung as she moved, catching the morning light. "Please, and perhaps something sweet for the children." Sarah nodded, selecting the freshest loaf and wrapping it carefully in brown paper. "Judge Hamilton is back in town, I hear," she said, making the kind of small talk that stitched together the fabric of frontier communities. "Yes, and none too pleased about it." Abigail lowered her voice. "They say he's to preside over a trial. Some Indian caught stealing." Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. "What will happen to him?" "What always happens to thieves out here." Abigail shrugged with the casual acceptance of frontier justice. "Especially Indian thieves." After Abigail left, Sarah moved to the window, gazing across the street where earlier this week she had noticed a thin Apache man watching her bakery. There had been something in his eyes, not menace, but desperation. She recognized it because she had seen it in her own reflection those first difficult months after Thomas's passing. Thomas had brought her west with promises of opportunity, away from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. "A place to build something of our own," he'd said. 1 month after arriving, pneumonia took him, leaving Sarah alone in a raw land she barely understood. The bakery had been her salvation. Thomas had purchased the building before falling ill, one of the few brick structures in Copper Springs. While other women might have fled back east, Sarah stayed, turning grief into flour and water and yeast. The town had respected her resilience, if not always understanding her quiet ways. Judge Marcus Hamilton was another matter entirely. His circuit took him through Copper Springs every few months, dispensing a harsh brand of justice that bordered on cruelty, particularly when it came to the native population. The drought these past 18 months had only worsened tensions, as desperate times pushed people toward desperate acts. That evening, as Sarah closed up shop, Sheriff Wade Callahan stopped by, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight. "Evening, Mrs. Holloway," he said, removing his hat. The Civil War had left its mark on him, a slight limp and eyes that had seen too much death. "Just wanted to advise you to keep your doors locked tight. We've had reports of an Apache stealing from businesses." "Has anyone been hurt?" she asked. "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. These people get desperate enough. There's no telling what they might do." After he left, Sarah bolted the door and began her closing routine. As she counted the day's earnings, modest but sufficient, she thought again of the thin Apache man. There had been dignity in his bearing despite his obvious poverty. She wondered what circumstances had driven him to watch her bakery with such longing. That night, as she had every night for 5 years, Sarah climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment above the bakery. removed the silver locket, and placed it beside her bed. But for the first time in many months, her thoughts before sleep were not of Thomas, but of hungry eyes watching from across a dusty street. Nakohi crouched beside the small fire outside his modest dwelling at the edge of the reservation, carefully whittling the final details on a wooden eagle. His eldest son, Talasi, sat nearby, watching his father's skilled hands transform raw wood into something beautiful. "Is it finished, father?" the 12-year-old asked. "Almost." Nakohi smoothed a rough edge with his thumb. "It's for your brother. His fever broke this morning. The drought had changed everything. 2 summers ago, the streams still ran clear and deer still grazed in the valleys. Now, dust claimed the land, game had migrated north, and the reservation's meager rations had been reduced further still. Nakohi, once a respected scout for the U.S. Army before the government forced his people onto this barren plot, now struggled to feed 3 hungry children. He placed the finished eagle beside him and gazed toward the sleeping forms of his younger children. 8-year-old Istis curled protectively around her little brother Ahot, just 5. The boy's recent illness had frightened Nakohi more than he cared to admit. Without their mother, lost to childbirth when Ahot was born, he alone stood between his children and the cruelties of this world. "Will you tell us again about the mountains?" Talasi asked, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Nakohi nodded and began the story of their ancestral homeland, speaking in the Apache tongue to preserve what remained of their heritage. His people had once roamed freely across territories now claimed by white settlers. Stories were all he could give his children of that life. "Will we ever go back?" Talasi asked when the story ended. "Perhaps someday," Nakohi replied, though he held little hope. The reservation boundaries grew tighter each year, not looser. The next morning, Nakohi left Talasi in charge and walked the 5 miles to Copper Springs. He had been watching the bakery for nearly a week now, drawn by the scent of fresh bread that reminded him of happier times. The woman who owned it, a widow he had learned from conversations overheard in town, seemed different from other settlers. There was a kindness in her movements, a solitude in her eyes that mirrored his own. Copper Springs tolerated his presence only because a few residents remembered his service as a scout. Even so, no one would hire an Apache for honest work. "No jobs for Injuns," they would say, not meeting his eyes. Some days he collected firewood to sell. Other days he returned empty-handed. Today, watching his children's hunger gnaw deeper, desperation pushed him closer to the bakery than before. The widow worked alone. Sometimes she placed unsold bread in a barrel behind the shop at day's end. Perhaps tonight there might be something, anything, to bring back to his children. As dusk approached, Nakohi made his decision. He would wait until dark, then check the barrel. Not stealing exactly, he told himself, just taking what would otherwise be wasted. The thought provided little comfort, against the knowledge of what capture would mean. That evening, he returned to the children with a rabbit he had managed to snare. A rare success that produced genuine smiles as they ate the meager meal. Afterward, he presented the wooden eagle to Ahot, whose small face lit up with delight. "It flies high above the mountains," Nakohi explained as the boy turned it in his hands. "It sees our homeland and watches over us." Later, when the children slept, Nakohi slipped away into the darkness. The 5-mile journey to town seemed shorter now that purpose drove his steps. As Copper Springs came into view, its windows glowing with lamplight, he touched the knife at his belt. Not for protection, but as a reminder of the man he had once been and still wished to be. Honorable, strong, a provider. The bakery's windows were dark when he arrived. With careful steps, he made his way to the back of the building, toward the barrel that might contain tomorrow's meal for his children. Sheriff Wade Callahan pinned the brass star to his vest each morning with the same ritual care he had once given to loading his rifle in the war. 17 years since. Appomattox, and still the memories lingered. The badge meant something to him, order in a place determined to remain wild, justice where most preferred vengeance. This morning, however, brought the kind of trouble that tested his principles. The Apache, Nakohe, he remembered from the man's scouting days, sat silently in the cell, his expression unreadable. You should have known better, Callahan said, pouring coffee into a tin cup and sliding it through the bars. Mrs. Holloway reported the break-in first thing, said nothing was taken, but that don't matter much. You were inside her place without permission. Nakohe took the cup but didn't drink. My children are hungry. Everybody's hungry with this drought. Don't make stealing right. Callahan sighed, feeling the familiar weight of being caught between his duty and his conscience. Judge Hamilton arrives this afternoon. He'll set the trial for tomorrow most likely. Copper Springs Courthouse stood opposite the jailhouse, a modest wooden structure, with a small bell tower that had never actually housed a bell. Inside, leather-bound law books collected dust on shelves behind the judge's bench, most never opened since their arrival from back east. By noon, word of the arrest had spread through town. Mayor Edgar Whitaker strode into the sheriff's office, his considerable girth preceding him. A banker before being elected mayor, Whitaker viewed the town as an investment requiring protection. This is an opportunity, Sheriff, he announced without preamble, peering through the bars at Nakohe. These savages need to understand there are consequences. Make an example of this one, the rest will think twice before coming near our town. The law will take its course, Callahan replied evenly. See that it does. Whitaker adjusted his watch chain. I've already spoken with Judge Hamilton. He understands the importance of swift justice. After Whitaker left, Samuel Reed from the Copper Springs Gazette arrived, notebook in hand. Unlike the mayor, Reed approached the cell with curiosity rather than contempt. They're saying you broke into the widow's bakery, Reed said, studying Nakohe. Any comment? For the paper, Callahan intervened. He'll have his say at trial. That's enough questions. Fair enough. Reed turned to leave but paused at the door. Strange, though. Sarah Holloway's not the type to press charges. Must be more to this story. By late afternoon, Judge Marcus Hamilton's arrival added to the growing spectacle. The judge had administered frontier justice for 15 years, developing a reputation for harsh sentences, particularly for Native American defendants. Docket's clear, Hamilton informed Callahan after reviewing the charge. We'll try him first thing tomorrow. Open and shut case, I imagine. Sarah Holloway found him in her shop after hours, Callahan explained. Says nothing was taken. Breaking and entering is still a crime, Sheriff. 5 years hard labor would be appropriate. For a first offense? When nothing was stolen, the judge's eyes narrowed. You going soft on me, Callahan? Remember who keeps order out here. It's not compassion. Across town, Sarah stood in her bakery, staring at the back door where she'd discovered Nakohe the previous night. She had been working late, kneading dough for the morning, when she heard the careful scrape of the door. Their eyes had met in the lamplight, hers wide with surprise, his dark with shame. Before he fled into the night, she hadn't meant to report it. But when Sheriff Callahan came by on his morning rounds asking about unusual activity, the words tumbled out before she could consider their weight. Now a man faced severe punishment because of her careless report. As the sun set, Sarah made a decision. Locking the bakery, she crossed the dusty street toward the jailhouse, the silver locket at her throat catching the last golden rays of daylight. Morning brought a peculiar energy to Copper Springs. Trials were rare entertainment in frontier towns, and by 9 o'clock, nearly every resident had found reason to be near the courthouse. Women in their best calico dresses gossiped on the boardwalk while men passed flasks and opinions with equal vigor. Inside the jailhouse, Nakohe sat motionless as Sheriff Callahan unlocked his cell. Time to go, Callahan said, securing iron manacles around Nakohe's wrists. Judge Hamilton's not known for patience. Nakohe's only response was a quiet question. My children, Callahan hesitated. Sent word to the reservation. Old woman named Sinopa said she'd mind them. He didn't mention the reluctance in the elder's agreement or her warning that she had little enough food for herself. Across the street, the courthouse, filled beyond capacity. Judge Hamilton, in his black robe slightly frayed at the cuffs, took his seat at the bench. A leather-bound Bible waited for testimonies, its gilded pages catching the light from the high windows. "Court is in session," announced the clerk, a thin man whose perpetual cough punctuated the proceedings. "The Territory versus Nakohe, on charges of breaking and entering, with intent to steal." A young man rose from behind a small table. Peter Davenport had been appointed as defense attorney, a formality Judge Hamilton insisted upon despite its frequent meaninglessness. Fresh from law studies back east, Davenport had been in the Territory less than 6 months and showed more interest in prospecting claims than practicing law. "Your Honor," Davenport began without looking at his client. "As the accused has no means to pay for counsel, I've been appointed to represent him. We plead not guilty on grounds of necessity." Judge Hamilton's bushy eyebrows rose. "Necessity? An interesting choice. Counselor, proceed." From the gallery, Sarah watched the proceedings with growing unease. She had been unable to see Nakohe at the jail the previous evening, arriving after visiting hours ended. Now she observed his dignified bearing despite the hostile stares directed his way. Mayor Whitaker occupied the front row, occasionally turning to nod approvingly at prominent citizens. Samuel Reed scribbled notes in the corner, his skeptical gaze moving between the participants as if assembling a puzzle. The prosecutor, a severe man named Wallace Hargrove who doubled as the town's only undertaker, called his first witness. "Mrs. Sarah Holloway," he announced. Sarah rose, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands as she moved to the witness stand. After placing her hand on the Bible and swearing to tell the truth, she faced Hargrove's questioning. "Mrs. Holloway, please tell the court what occurred on the night in question." Sarah cleared her throat. "I was working late, preparing dough for the morning baking. I heard someone at the back door and found a man inside my shop." "And is that man present in this courtroom today?" "Yes, him." She gestured toward Nakohe, meeting his eyes briefly. "Did he take anything from your establishment?" "No, he fled when he saw me." "But he had entered without permission, correct?" "Yes." "And in your estimation, what was his purpose in doing so?" Sarah hesitated, looking at Nakohe again. Something in his quiet dignity reminded her of Thomas in his final days, fighting against insurmountable odds with silent strength. "Mrs. Holloway?" the judge prompted. "I believe he was hungry," she said simply. Hargrove's expression soured. "Hunger does not excuse breaking and entering, Mrs. Holloway." No further questions. Davenport declined to cross-examine, barely looking up from his notes. Judge Hamilton leaned forward. "Are there any other witnesses in this matter before the court renders judgment?" Hargrove shook his head. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor. The facts are clear and uncontested. This man broke into Mrs. Holloway's establishment with intent to steal. We ask for the maximum sentence allowed by territorial law." The judge nodded, reaching for his gavel. "Does the accused wish to make any statement before sentencing?" Nakohe slowly rose. "I have 3 children. They have not eaten in 2 days." A murmur rippled through the courtroom before Hamilton silenced it with a sharp rap of his gavel. "While the court sympathizes with your situation," the judge began, his tone suggesting the opposite, "the law must be—" "Your Honor," Sarah interrupted, rising suddenly from her seat. "If I may, I have more to say." The courtroom fell silent as Sarah stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. Judge Hamilton's stern gaze fixed upon her. "Mrs. Holloway, you've given your testimony. Please be seated." "I haven't told the whole truth, Your Honor." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. "I request permission to clarify my statement." Hamilton's frown deepened, but curiosity flickered in his eyes. "Very well. Approach the witness stand." As Sarah returned to the stand, she caught Sheriff Callahan's appraising look. Mayor Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Samuel Reed's pencil hovered expectantly above his notebook. Nakohi watched her with guarded surprise. Once sworn in again, Sarah straightened her shoulders and began. I noticed this man, Nakohi, watching my bakery several days before the incident. Not in a threatening way but with hunger. I recognized that look. She paused, gathering courage. The night in question, I was working late when I heard someone at the back door. I found him near where I keep day-old bread. Hargrove interrupted. You've already established he broke in, Mrs. Holloway. No, I haven't been clear, Sarah countered. The door was unlatched. I often leave it so when working late for air circulation. He entered, yes, but didn't break in. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Hamilton silenced it with his gavel. Continue, Mrs. Holloway. When I saw him, I wasn't frightened. I asked if he was hungry. Sarah glanced at Nakohi, whose eyes had widened slightly. He seemed startled that I spoke to him directly. I offered him bread. A loaf I'd set aside that wasn't quite perfect for selling. Hargrove stepped forward. Your Honor, this contradicts. Let her finish, Hamilton ordered, leaning forward with interest. He took the bread and left quickly. There was a misunderstanding when Sheriff Callahan asked me about disturbances. I mentioned someone had been in the shop, but never intended to report a crime. Sarah looked directly at the judge. I gave him that bread, Your Honor. He didn't steal anything. The courtroom erupted. Mayor Whitaker's face flushed crimson as he rose to his feet. This is preposterous. She's lying to protect him. Order. Hamilton's gavel struck repeatedly until quiet returned. The judge studied Sarah intently. Mrs. Holloway, you understand you're under oath? Perjury is a serious offense. I'm telling the truth, Your Honor. She held his gaze steadily. I gave him bread. I would have given him more had he asked. Why would you lie in your initial report to the sheriff? Hargrove demanded. I didn't lie exactly. I was unclear. When the sheriff mentioned concerns about theft, I should have been more precise about what happened. Sarah's fingers found her locket, drawing strength from its familiar weight. It wasn't until I heard about the arrest that I realized my mistake. Judge Hamilton turned to Nakohi. Do you confirm this account? For a moment, Nakohi seemed torn between pride and survival. Then slowly he nodded. She offered bread. I took it and left. Hamilton's expression remained skeptical. Mrs. Holloway, you realize what you're doing? Your reputation is less important than an innocent man's life, she finished firmly. In the tense silence that followed, Samuel Reed's voice rose from the gallery. If I may, Your Honor, Mrs. Holloway's reputation for honesty is well established in this community. If she says she gave this man bread, I believe her. Several heads nodded in agreement, though many others looked doubtful or disapproving. Judge Hamilton drummed his fingers on the bench, clearly displeased with this turn of events. After a long moment, he sighed heavily. The court cannot establish criminal intent if the property owner freely gave the item in question. He glared at Sarah, then Nakohi. Case dismissed for lack of evidence. The defendant is free to go. The gavel fell with a crack that seemed to splinter the very air. As the crowd's reaction swelled, some relieved, others outraged, Sarah caught Nakohi's gaze across the courtroom. His expression held something she couldn't quite name. Confusion, gratitude, and perhaps a question she wasn't yet ready to answer. The morning after the trial, Sarah found a note slipped under her bakery door. No signature marked the crude scrawl. Indian lover, get out. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket, her hands steady despite the implicit threat. By mid-morning, the pattern became clear. Regular customers who normally chatted amiably now purchased their bread in stony silence or didn't come at all. Mrs. Porter, usually so friendly, sent her young servant instead of coming herself. The girl avoided Sarah's eyes as she placed coins on the counter. Will there be anything else? Sarah asked, knowing the answer. No, ma'am. The girl scurried out, the bell tinkling her retreat. By noon, Samuel Reed appeared, his notebook conspicuously absent. Quite the stir you've caused, Mrs. Holloway, he said, selecting a small loaf. Half the town's calling you a saint, the other half something considerably less flattering. And which half do you belong to, Mr. Reed? Sarah placed his bread in paper without meeting his eyes. I belong to the truth, ma'am. Always have. He paid and tipped his hat. Might want to read tomorrow's Gazette. Not everyone disapproves of compassion, even for an Apache. As he left, Mayor Whitaker entered, his considerable frame nearly filling the doorway. Unlike the others, he made no pretense of being a customer. Mrs. Holloway, he began without preamble, as mayor of this town, I feel obligated to express concern about your judgment. Sarah continued, wiping down her countertop. Is there a law against giving bread to a hungry person, Mr. Whitaker? No law, no. But there are expectations of propriety. This community has standards. He adjusted his watch chain importantly. Your business license comes up for renewal next month. The threat hung in the air between them. Are you suggesting the town council might find reason to deny my renewal? Sarah asked, finally meeting his gaze. I'm suggesting you consider how your actions reflect on this community. We're trying to attract investors, respectable families. Having our most prominent widow fraternizing with Indians sends the wrong message. I gave a hungry man bread. I would hardly call that fraternizing. You undermined the court and made Judge Hamilton look foolish. Whitaker's jowls quivered with indignation. Actions have consequences, Mrs. Holloway. I hope you remember that. After he left, Sarah allowed herself a moment of doubt. The bakery was her livelihood, her independence. Without it, she had nothing. Was one act of kindness worth risking everything? The afternoon brought Reverend Clark, his gentle demeanor a stark contrast to the mayor's blustering. Sarah, he said kindly, using her given name as was his pastoral privilege, I wanted to commend your Christian charity. I was hungry and you gave me food. Matthew doesn't specify which hungry people deserve feeding. His support warmed her, though she wondered if it would make any difference against Whitaker's influence. As dusk approached and Sarah prepared to close, Sheriff Callahan appeared. Thought you should know, he said, leaning against the counter. Nakohe collected his children from the reservation elder. They've set up camp just outside town. Sarah paused in her sweeping. Is that allowed? It's not on town property, so there's not much I can do. But folks are talking. Some don't like having Indians so close. He studied her with shrewd eyes. You put yourself in a difficult position yesterday. I told the truth. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, you saved a man from prison. Callahan straightened. Just be careful. Nakohe may feel indebted to you now, but that doesn't mean you should trust him. People are watching both of you. After locking up, Sarah stood in the gathering darkness, staring toward the hills where Nakohe and his children had made camp. The threatening note crinkled in her pocket. For the first time in years, she felt something stir within her besides grief and routine. A sense of purpose, perhaps, or defiance. That night, she packed a basket with bread, cheese, and dried apples. Tomorrow, she decided, she would pay a visit to her unusual new neighbors. Dawn painted the eastern sky as Sarah followed the narrow trail beyond town limits. The basket hung heavy on her arm, filled with yesterday's unsold bread and a few modest provisions. Finding Nakohe's camp proved easier than expected. A thin wisp of smoke curled above a small clearing near the creek bend. She hesitated at the edge of the camp, suddenly uncertain. 3 children huddled around a small fire, the eldest stirring something in a battered pot. Of Nakohe there was no sign. Hello, she called softly, not wanting to startle them. 3 pairs of dark eyes turned toward her. The oldest boy, perhaps 12, stood protectively before his siblings. Your father, Sarah began. Is he? Behind you, came a deep voice. Sarah turned to find Nakohe emerging from the trees, a small bundle of wild herbs in his hand. His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Mrs. Holloway, he acknowledged with a slight nod. I brought food, she said, lifting the basket awkwardly. For your children. He studied her for a long moment before gesturing toward the fire. Please, The children watched curiously as Sarah placed the basket on a flat rock. The youngest boy, barely 5, stared openly at her pale skin and light hair. "I'm Sarah," she offered, kneeling to their level. "These are my sons, Talasi and Ahot," Nakohi said, indicating the eldest and youngest. "My daughter, Istis." Talasi remained wary, but Istis offered a shy smile. Ahot hid partially behind his sister, clutching a wooden eagle. "That's beautiful," Sarah said, pointing to the toy. "Did your father make it?" Ahot nodded, holding it closer. "He was sick," Nakohi explained, setting down his gathered herbs. "The eagle watches over him." An uncomfortable silence settled between the adults as the children eagerly investigated the basket's contents. When Ahot bit into a sweet roll, his face lit with such joy that Sarah felt her eyes moisten. "Thank you," Nakohi said quietly, "for the food, and for yesterday. I only told the truth, not the whole truth." His eyes, deep and knowing, held hers. "I never spoke to you that night." Sarah flushed. "Perhaps not with words." "Why would you lie for an Apache?" "I didn't lie for an Apache. I lied for a father trying to feed his children." She watched as Istis carefully divided a small apple among the 3 of them. "No one should hang for that." Nakohi's stern expression softened slightly. "The town will turn against you. Some already have." She touched the pocket where the threatening note remained. "But I've survived worse." "As have I." He gestured toward a flat stone near the fire. "Will you sit? The morning is cool." As Sarah settled herself, Nakohi added a few sticks to the flames. The herbs he'd gathered filled the air with an unfamiliar but pleasant aroma. "Wild mint and sage," he explained, noticing her interest. "Good for tea and medicine. You know the plants well." "I was a scout for the army before." He didn't finish the sentence. No explanation was needed for how his people had been forced onto reservations. "My husband spoke of Indian scouts," Sarah said. "He believed they saved many soldiers' lives." "Your husband is gone?" Nakohi asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Sarah nodded. 5 years now. Pneumonia. My wife died bringing Ahot into the world." His gaze drifted to his youngest son. "We share this burden of raising children alone." The simple acknowledgement of their common experience touched Sarah more deeply than any elaborate sympathy. For a moment, they sat in understanding silence. "Your property," Nakohi said eventually. "The fence behind your bakery leans badly. The roof gutters are blocked. I could repair these things." "I couldn't pay much," Sarah admitted. "Food for my children would be payment enough." The offer surprised her, not for its practicality, but for what it revealed of his pride. Not charity, but an exchange of value. "I would appreciate the help," she said carefully. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah reluctantly stood to leave. "I should return before the morning rush." Nakohi nodded. "We will come tomorrow. I will fix your fence first." Walking back toward town, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years, despite the complicated path ahead. Behind her, the basket of food. Before her, an uncertain future. Between them, the first fragile threads of connection. Sarah's account book told the story plainly. 2 weeks after the trial, her daily receipts had fallen by nearly half. She traced her finger down the column of figures, the neat rows of her handwriting belying the anxiety that gripped her. At this rate, she would deplete her modest savings before winter. The bell above the door jingled, and Sarah closed the ledger quickly, straightening to greet her customer. Reverend Clark entered, removing his hat. "Good morning, Sarah. The usual, please." As she wrapped his bread, Sarah noticed his expression. "Something troubles you, Reverend?" "Church attendance was down yesterday," he sighed. "Mayor Whitaker and his supporters have been suggesting my sermons on Christian charity are politically motivated." "Because you defended my actions?" "Partially. There's talk of starting a second church, one less sympathetic to the native population." He accepted his bread with a sad smile. "But God's truth doesn't change with popular opinion." After he left, Sarah reopened the ledger. The final column, Nakohi showed no monetary figures but careful notations of work completed. Fence repaired, gutters cleaned, backstep rebuilt. His craftsmanship was impeccable, each task done with quiet precision. In exchange, she provided daily bread and whatever else she could spare for his children. The arrangement had quickly settled into routine. Nakohi would arrive at dawn, work until the bakery opened, then return after closing to complete larger projects. Sometimes his children came with him, their initial shyness gradually yielding to curiosity about the strange world of flour and ovens. Outside, she heard the familiar sound of Nakohi's tools as he replaced rotted boards on her storage shed. Through the window, she watched him work, his movements efficient, his focus absolute. She had learned that this intensity was not merely about the task but about maintaining dignity in a world determined to strip it from him. That afternoon, as Sarah closed up shop, Nakohi approached with an unexpected question. "Tomorrow is supply day at the reservation. Would you come? The children ask for you." Surprised by the invitation, Sarah hesitated. "Is that allowed?" "The agent doesn't care who takes the supplies, only that they're distributed." Something flickered in his expression, pride wrestling with necessity. "You could see where we live, if you wish." "I would like that," she said, realizing the truth of it only as the words left her mouth. The next morning found Sarah traveling alongside Nakohi in a borrowed wagon. The 5-mile journey passed largely in silence, but it was a comfortable one, the kind shared by people who no longer feel obliged to fill empty spaces with words. As they crested the final hill, Sarah's first glimpse of the reservation struck her with its desolation. Unlike the town's orderly grid, the Apache encampment sprawled haphazardly across barren ground. Crude dwellings, some traditional wickiups, others cobbled-together shacks, clustered near a single water pump. Children with hollow cheeks played listlessly in the dust. "The government promised schools, tools, seed for farming," Nakohi said quietly. "Most never came." At the distribution center, a weathered building flying a tattered American flag, a weary-looking agent handed out meager rations. Flour weevil-ridden, beans often moldy, salt beef so tough it required hours of boiling. Sarah watched as families accepted these inadequate provisions with resigned dignity. "Monthly rations," Nakohi explained, securing their allotment. "Meant to feed a family for 30 days. Usually lasts 10. An elderly woman approached, saying something to Nakohi in Apache. He responded respectfully, then turned to Sarah. "This is Sinopa. She watched my children during the trial." Sarah nodded to the elder, whose weathered face revealed a lifetime of hardship yet retained a spark of fierce intelligence. Sinopa studied Sarah intently before speaking again to Nakohi. "She says you have good eyes," he translated. "Not afraid to see truth." As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Sarah noticed a crowd gathering near the agent's office. Raised voices carried on the wind. "What's happening?" she asked. "Land commission," Nakohi replied grimly. "More reservation boundaries being redrawn. Each time they get smaller." On the return journey, Sarah sat silently, her mind filled with images of what she'd witnessed. The ledger's dwindling numbers suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the systematic deprivation she had seen. "Your people endure much," she said finally. Nakohi's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "We survive. It is what we know how to do." Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as Sarah kneaded dough for the morning's baking. After months of drought, the air had turned heavy with promise. But Nakohi's expression as he examined the sky from her back door held more concern than relief. "Bad storm coming," he said, his voice low. "Not gentle rain." Sarah wiped flour from her hands. "How can you tell?" In answer, he pulled a hand-drawn map from his pocket, spreading it on her table. The crude but precise drawing showed Copper Springs, the reservation, and the surrounding landscape marked with symbols she didn't recognize. "The dry creek beds here and here," he pointed. "They fill fast when heavy rain comes from the northwest. Water rushes down from the high ground." "Flash flooding," Sarah murmured, understanding dawning. "Will the town be in danger?" "Some parts. The lower streets near the creek. His finger traced a path. But the reservation sits in the main water path. My people are most at risk. By midday, the sky had darkened to an ominous purple gray. Wind rattled the bakery windows as Sarah hurriedly packed leftover bread into baskets. Sheriff Callahan appeared at her door, his expression grim. Storm's coming fast, Mrs. Holloway. You'd best secure your property and move to higher ground. Sheriff, she said urgently. Nako, he says the reservation will be hit hardest. The creek beds. The Indian, Callahan frowned. What would he know about it? He knows this land better than any of us. He's made maps of the water paths. She grabbed the drawing from her table. Look here. He's marked where the flooding will be worst. Callahan studied the map skeptically, but years of frontier survival had taught him to respect useful information regardless of its source. I'll send riders to warn folks near the creek, he conceded. But I can't spare men for the reservation. Then I'll go, Sarah declared, already gathering her shawl. Nako, he's gone ahead with his children. I promised to bring supplies. Mrs. Holloway, this isn't wise. But Sarah had already pushed past him into the howling wind, leaving the sheriff staring after her with reluctant admiration. The journey to the reservation proved arduous against the strengthening gale. Twice Sarah nearly turned back as lightning split the sky and thunder shook the ground. When the first heavy drops began to fall, she urged her horse faster, praying she wouldn't be too late. She found the reservation in controlled chaos. Nako, he moved among his people, directing families to gather belongings and move to higher ground. Children cried as mothers hurried them along. Elders were carried on improvised stretchers. Sarah, Nako, he called, spotting her. Relief briefly softened his features before urgency returned. You shouldn't have come. It's dangerous. I brought what I could, she said, dismounting and handing him the bread baskets. How can I help? Without hesitation, he directed her to assist a group of mothers with young children. As Sarah worked alongside the Apache women, helping carry babies and essential items to safer ground, she felt the strangeness of her presence fade. Shared purpose transcended the barriers of language and culture. The rain intensified, turning from scattered drops to drenching sheets in minutes. Muddy rivulets appeared underfoot, quickly becoming rushing streams. In the distance, they heard the ominous roar of approaching floodwaters. Higher ground! Now! Nako, he shouted, his voice carrying authority that prompted immediate action. Sarah helped an elderly woman navigate the increasingly treacherous path. Behind them, the main encampment was already ankle-deep in swirling water. As they reached the relative safety of a rocky outcropping, Sarah turned to see the devastating power of the flash flood. Where homes had stood minutes before, a churning torrent now raged. Lightning illuminated Nakohi's face as he conducted a hasty count of his people. Concern etched deep lines around his eyes when he reached Sarah. Sinopa, he said urgently. The elder you met. She's missing. Without waiting for a response, he turned toward the flood path. Sarah caught his arm. You can't go back down there. His eyes met hers, resolution mingling with something deeper. She was like a grandmother to me after my parents died. I must try. In that moment, watching him prepare to risk his life for an elder who might already be lost, Sarah recognized the fullness of her feelings for this man. His courage, his sense of duty, his unfailing compassion despite all he had suffered. Then I'm coming with you, she said, tightening her soaked shawl around her shoulders. 3 days after the flood, Sarah sat on her back porch watching Nakohi split firewood with precise, powerful strokes. The storm had transformed the landscape. Parched earth now muddy, dry creek beds flowing again. But it had transformed something within them as well. Together they had found Sinopa clinging to a cottonwood tree, the floodwaters swirling around her. Their desperate rescue, wading through chest-deep currents with the frail elder between them, had forged a bond words couldn't adequately express. Now, in the storm's aftermath, Nakohi and his children had temporarily relocated to Sarah's small storage shed. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but practicality outweighed propriety. The reservation remained largely uninhabitable until the waters receded. The roof is nearly dry, Nakohi said, setting down his axe and joining her on the porch steps. We can return to our own place soon. Sarah nodded, feeling a surprising reluctance at the thought. These past days had created a rhythm she found unexpectedly comfortable. Nakohi working around the property, the children helping in the bakery, evenings spent in simple companionship. Your people are rebuilding quickly, she observed. We are used to starting over. A hint of bitterness colored his words. Each time with less than before. They sat in companionable silence as the setting sun painted the western sky. From inside the bakery came the sound of the children laughing as they helped with cleanup, a sound that had been absent from Sarah's life for too long. They are happy here, Nakohi said softly. It has been difficult for them growing up without a mother. You've done well with them, Sarah replied. They're wonderful children, but they need more than I alone can give. He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. A child needs both father and mother to learn all of life's lessons. The implication hung in the air between them, too delicate to grasp directly. Sarah's fingers found her silver locket, the familiar gesture now more habit than grief. I always thought Thomas and I would have children, she admitted. After he died, I put that dream aside. Nakohi watched her thoughtfully. The past shapes us but need not define our future. The wisdom in his simple statement touched something deep within her. For 5 years, Sarah had lived in the shadow of what might have been, letting grief set the boundaries of her existence. Now, unexpectedly, she found herself contemplating possibilities. Sheriff Callahan came by this morning while you were at the reservation, she said, changing the subject. He said your warning saved lives in town. People are talking about it. And what do they say? Some are grateful. Others. She trailed off, not wanting to repeat the uglier comments. Cannot accept that an Apache might have something of value to offer. Nakohi finished her thought with the calm acceptance of one long accustomed to prejudice. The world is changing slowly, Sarah offered. Perhaps someday. I may not live to see such changes, he interrupted gently. But my children might. That is why what happens now matters. From her apron pocket, Sarah withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. I've been meaning to give you this. Nakohi unwrapped the package carefully, revealing Thomas's pocket watch. The silver case gleamed in the fading light, the initials TH engraved on the back. This was your husband's, he said, clearly surprised. Yes. Sarah watched his face carefully. I've kept it in a drawer these 5 years. It should be used, not hidden away. They both understood she was offering more than a timepiece. The watch represented her past, her heart, her willingness to move forward. Nakohi held it reverently. I cannot accept something so valuable. You can, she said firmly. And you will. Thomas would have approved of a man like you having it. Slowly, Nakohi slipped the watch into his pocket. His hand covered hers briefly, the touch conveying gratitude, respect, and something deeper neither was quite ready to name. From the bakery doorway, Talasi watched this exchange with thoughtful eyes, understanding more than either adult might have guessed. Behind him, his siblings continued their chores, unaware that the foundations of their future were shifting beneath gentle words and unspoken promises. Sarah awoke to the sound of shattering glass. Dawn had barely broken as she hurried downstairs, wrapping a shawl around her nightdress. In the bakery's front room, shards glittered across the floor beneath a broken window. Through the jagged opening, the cool morning air carried the acrid scent of fresh paint. Across her storefront, crude red letters proclaimed, "Injun lover," and worse words she couldn't bring herself to acknowledge. She was sweeping up glass when Nakohi appeared at the back door, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. Who did this? He asked, kneeling to help gather larger fragments. It doesn't matter, Sarah replied, though her hands trembled slightly. It's just a window. It is not just a window. His voice remained calm, but she recognized the controlled anger beneath. This is a warning. By mid-morning, Sheriff Callahan stood in her shop examining the damage. His weathered face revealed little, but the tightness around his eyes suggested concern. Third incident this month against folks seen as sympathetic to Indians, he noted, running a finger along the windowsill. First the missionary school, then Reverend Clark's church, now your place. Will you investigate? Sarah asked, already suspecting the answer. Callahan sighed. I'll ask around, but you know how it is. Nobody sees anything when they don't want to. After he left, Sarah scrubbed at the painted slurs, each stroke fueled by a quiet fury. She had known there would be consequences for helping Nakohi, but the ugliness still caught her unprepared. The bell above the door jingled as Samuel Reed entered, notebook in hand. Heard about the vandalism, he said without preamble. Mind if I write about it? Will it help? Sarah asked, pausing in her cleaning. Might. Public opinion's been shifting since the flood. Nakohi's warning saved property, maybe lives. Makes it harder to paint all Apaches as savages. Reed jotted something in his notebook. Course it makes others double down. Mayor's been particularly vocal lately. That afternoon, as if summoned by mention, Mayor Whitaker himself appeared with 2 town councilmen in tow. Mrs. Holloway, he began with artificial sympathy. This unfortunate incident, while certainly regrettable, illustrates the concerns I've been expressing. Does it? Sarah continued wiping down counters, refusing to be intimidated. I thought it illustrated ignorance and cowardice. The mayor's face flushed. Your association with these people has consequences. Not just for you, but for the reputation of our town. These people saved lives during the flood, she countered, including some on this very council. One good deed doesn't erase years of raids and violence, Councilman Peters interjected. You're being naive, Mrs. Holloway. Dangerous naive. After they departed with thinly veiled warnings about her business license, Sarah closed early. The broken window, temporarily patched with a board, cast strange shadows across the empty shop. That evening, Nakohi found her sitting alone on the back porch. The children are asking why you didn't come for dinner, he said, settling beside her. I'm not very good company tonight. His silence invited explanation without demanding it, a quality she had come to appreciate. They want me to send you away, she finally admitted. The mayor, the council. They're threatening my livelihood. Then perhaps I should go. His voice held no self-pity, only pragmatism. Return to the reservation with my children. Is that what you want? What I want? He began, then stopped, choosing his words carefully. What I want has not mattered for many years. But I will not be the cause of your suffering. Sarah turned to face him fully. And if I said your leaving would cause me greater suffering? Something shifted in his expression. Surprise followed by a cautious hope. Before he could respond, hoofbeats approached. Sheriff Callahan appeared around the corner of the building, his expression grave. Mrs. Holloway, Nakohi. He nodded to each. Thought you should know. Group of men gathering at the saloon, drinking heavy and talking about solving the Indian problem once and for all. Byron Whitaker, the mayor's son, is stirring them up something fierce. A lynch mob, Nakohi stated flatly. Not yet, Callahan replied, but headed that way by sunrise if the whiskey keeps flowing. He adjusted his hat uncomfortably. I can't stop a dozen angry men alone, and I've got no deputies willing to stand against their neighbors for. He stopped abruptly. For an Apache, Nakohi finished. I understand. Sarah's hand found his in the gathering darkness. What can we do? Leave town tonight, Callahan suggested. Both of you, at least until this blows over. This is my home, Sarah said firmly. I won't be driven out by threats. Then prepare yourselves, the sheriff warned, turning to go. Because come morning, I fear threats may become something far worse. Samuel Reed hunched over his desk in the Gazette office, lamplight casting long shadows as he sorted through yellow documents. The territorial government had sent these archives during the town's incorporation, and most had sat untouched for years. But with tension brewing against Nakohi, Reed sought anything that might sway public opinion. A sharp knock interrupted his research. Sarah stood in the doorway, her expression tight with worry. "Samuel, have you heard about the men at the saloon? That's why I'm digging through this mess," he replied, gesturing to the scattered papers. "Looking for leverage. Against a lynch mob? What could possibly—" "History," Samuel interrupted, holding up a brittle document. "Land records from before the war. I found something interesting." Sarah moved closer, peering at the faded ink. "What is it?" "A land deed. Original territorial survey from 1855. Shows property boundaries west of town." He spread the document carefully. "Look here. This section was designated Apache territory under the Treaty of Silver Springs." Sarah traced the map with her finger. "But this includes Whitaker's entire ranch." "Exactly." Samuel's eyes gleamed with journalistic fervor. 3 years later, when Apache raids intensified, the territorial governor voided parts of the treaty. But not legally. Proper procedure required federal approval, which never came. "You're saying Whitaker's land still rightfully belongs to the Apache?" "According to these records, yes. His father acquired it during the war, when no one was paying attention to legal niceties." Samuel shuffled more papers. "There's more. Whitaker Sr. served as a special advisor to the territorial governor. Basically bribed his way into thousands of acres." Sarah sank into a chair. "This explains Whitaker's particular hatred for Nakohe. It's not just general prejudice. It's fear of losing his ill-gotten gains." "Precisely." Samuel carefully folded the deed. "Now we have leverage." By dawn, Sarah and Samuel had formulated a plan. With the deed secured in Sarah's pocket, they hurried toward her bakery where Nakohe waited with Sheriff Callahan. "Is it true?" Nakohe asked after Samuel explained their discovery. "This paper proves my people's claim?" "It proves part of the reservation land was illegally seized," Samuel confirmed, "including Whitaker's ranch." Nakohe's expression remained guarded. "Such papers have meant little to my people before. This time could be different," Sarah insisted. "With this evidence, we could petition the territorial court. Judge Hamilton may be harsh, but he respects the law." Sheriff Callahan shook his head. "You're assuming the law matters more than money and influence. Whitaker practically owns this town." "Not everyone supports him," Samuel countered. "The flood changed things. People saw Nakohe save their homes, their families. There's an opening here." Nakohe studied the deed thoughtfully. "My grandfather spoke of this treaty. He was present when it was signed." His finger traced the boundary line. "This creek, we called it Talking Waters, was sacred to our people." "Then it's your land by right," Sarah said firmly, "claiming it would bring danger to my children." Nakohe folded the document carefully. "Is justice worth such risk?" Before anyone could answer, the bakery door burst open. Talasi stood there, breathless and frightened. "Father, Ahote is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Nakohe demanded, rising quickly. "We were gathering kindling behind the shed. He wandered a little way off. I only looked away for a moment." The boy's voice broke. "I found this where he was playing." He held out a small, dirty moccasin, unmistakably Ahote's. Nakohe took the tiny shoe, his face a mask of controlled fear. "When?" "Just now. I searched everywhere before coming to you." Sheriff Callahan buckled his gun belt. "Could he have wandered off?" "He knows to stay close," Nakohe replied, already moving toward the door. "Wait!" Sarah caught his arm. "Last night, you heard what the sheriff said about the men at the saloon. What if this isn't an accident?" A terrible silence fell as the implication sank in. "Byron Whitaker," Samuel muttered. "He was the loudest voice calling for action against Nakohe. And now we found evidence that could cost his family everything," Sarah added, the pieces falling into terrible place. Nakohe clutched the small moccasin, his knuckles white. "If they have taken my son." "We don't know that yet," Callahan cautioned, though his hand rested on his pistol. "But I think we'd better find out. Now." By mid-morning, a small search party had assembled behind Sarah's bakery. Nakohi knelt in the dirt where Ahote had last been seen, his fingers lightly tracing indentations invisible to the others. Sheriff Callahan stood nearby, his expression grim. Reverend Clark had joined them, along with Samuel Reed and 3 townsmen who had benefited from Nakohi's flood warning. Footprints, Nakohi said finally, rising. A man's boots. Ahote's tracks stop here. He held up the small moccasin, its mate still missing. He was carried. Word of the missing child had spread quickly through Copper Springs, polarizing the town further. Some joined the search willingly. Others muttered that the Indian brat had likely just wandered off. Mayor Whitaker publicly expressed appropriate concern while suggesting the Apache might be using the situation to create sympathy. As Nakohi prepared to follow the trail, Sarah approached with a small pack of provisions. "I'm coming with you. It could be dangerous," he warned. "He's 5 years old and scared," she replied simply. "He'll need a woman's comfort when we find him. When, not if." The certainty in her voice steadied him. They followed the trail northwest, toward the abandoned Silverado mining camp. Once a bustling operation, it had played out 3 years earlier, leaving behind a ghost town of collapsing structures and dark shaft entrances. The perfect place to hide a child, or worse. "Tracks lead that way," Nakohi indicated, his voice tight with controlled fear, toward the old foreman's cabin. Sheriff Callahan signaled for the group to spread out. "Approach quietly. We don't know who's in there or what they intend." As they neared the dilapidated cabin, voices drifted through broken windows. One raised in anger, another pleading. Nakohi recognized both with a surge of rage and hope. "Byron Whitaker," he whispered to Sarah. "And Ahote is alive." Callahan drew his pistol. "Whitaker, this is the sheriff. Come out with your hands visible." Silence fell, followed by hurried movement inside. The door creaked open, revealing Byron Whitaker, the mayor's 25-year-old son, known more for drunken boasts than actual accomplishments. His face was flushed with whiskey and fear. "Sheriff," he stammered, "this isn't what it looks like." "Where's the boy?" Callahan demanded. "He's inside. He's fine." "I never meant." Byron's explanation cut short as Nakohi pushed past him into the cabin. Ahote huddled in a corner, tear-streaked but physically unharmed. The moment he saw his father, he launched himself forward with a cry of relief. Nakohi gathered him close, murmuring Apache words of comfort while his eyes, hard as flint, remained fixed on Byron. "What did you intend, taking my son?" The quiet question carried more menace than any shout. Byron backed against the wall. "It was just to scare you, to make you leave town," Father said. "Your father ordered this." Sheriff Callahan interrupted, grabbing Byron's collar. "Not exactly. He said something needed to be done. That's all." Byron's gaze darted between the angry faces surrounding him. "I was going to bring the kid back tonight. I just wanted to frighten him enough that you'd pack up and go." Sarah knelt beside Ahote, gently examining a scrape on his knee. "You kidnapped a child to frighten his father away? What kind of man does such a thing?" "You don't understand," Byron protested. "Those Indians have no right being in town. And now Reed's stirring up trouble with some old papers, threatening my father's land." He stopped abruptly, realizing he'd said too much. "So you knew about the deed," Samuel concluded. "Your father told you?" "Everyone needs to calm down," Byron backpedaled. "The boy's fine. No harm done." "No harm." Nakohi's voice was dangerously soft. He handed Ahote to Sarah and stepped toward Byron with lethal intent. Sheriff Callahan moved between them. "Stand down, Nakohi. He'll answer for this legally." "Your law," Nakohi spat. "The same law that stole our land? That hangs men for stealing bread while kidnappers walk free." "Not this time," Callahan promised, securing handcuffs around Byron's wrists. "Kidnapping's a serious charge, even for a Whitaker." As they emerged from the cabin, they found an unexpected scene. Word had spread about Ahote's disappearance, and a larger group from town had arrived, some supporting the search, others apparently intent on confronting Nakohi. Seeing Byron in custody created a ripple of confusion. "What's the meaning of this?" demanded one of Mayor Whitaker's allies. "Why is Byron arrested while the Indian walks free?" "Because Byron kidnapped a child," Reverend Clark answered loudly, ensuring everyone heard. "Nakohe's 5-year-old son." The revelation silenced even the most hostile voices. Whatever their prejudices, most frontier people drew the line at harming children. As they started back toward town, Ahote clinging to his father's neck, Sarah walked beside them, her hand resting protectively on the boy's back. The small, brave family had endured yet another injustice, but this time, they weren't facing it alone. The Copper Springs Gazette Special Edition hit the streets 2 days after Ahote's rescue. Samuel Reed had worked through the night, setting each letter of type with meticulous care. The headline blazed across the front page, "Justice Delayed. Territorial Land Deed Exposes Decades of Deception." Below it, smaller but equally bold, "Mayor's Son Arrested for Kidnapping Apache Child." Sarah read the paper at her kitchen table, Nakohe standing behind her, his presence solid and thoughtful. "He wrote this well," she observed, scanning the carefully constructed narrative that wove together the land theft, the kidnapping, and the broader history of mistreatment. Samuel had interviewed elders from the reservation, confirming Nakohe's grandfather's account of the treaty signing. Most damning was the reproduction of the land deed itself, showing clearly that Whitaker's prized ranch sat squarely on land legally designated for the Apache. Samuel had traced the paper trail of corruption that led from the territorial governor's office directly to Whitaker's father. "Will it make a difference?" Nakohe asked, his skepticism born of long experience with broken promises. Before Sarah could answer, a knock at the door announced Judge Hamilton. His usual stern countenance seemed troubled as he removed his hat. "Mrs. Holloway, Nakohe." He nodded to each. "I've read Reed's article. As the judicial representative in this district, I'm obligated to open an inquiry into these allegations." "They're not allegations, Your Honor," Sarah countered. "The documents speak for themselves." "Perhaps." Hamilton's bushy eyebrows drew together. "But legal matters are rarely so simple. The passage of time creates complications. 40 years of illegal occupation doesn't erase the original crime," she insisted. The judge sighed heavily. "No, but it does make remedy more difficult. I've scheduled a public hearing for next week. Both parties will present their cases, and I will render a decision based on territorial law." After he departed, Nakohe's expression remained guarded. "He serves the white man's interests. But he respects the law," Sarah reminded him. "And the law, in this case, appears to be on your side." That afternoon, Mayor Whitaker himself appeared at the bakery, his usual bluster replaced by calculating calm. "Mrs. Holloway," he began with forced cordiality, "I believe we have a misunderstanding that could be resolved privately, without the spectacle of a public hearing." "This isn't my misunderstanding to resolve," Sarah replied, continuing to knead dough. "The land claim belongs to Nakohe and his people." "Yes, well," Whitaker cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That's precisely what I wish to discuss. I'm prepared to offer compensation, a generous settlement to avoid unnecessary conflict." Sarah stopped her work, fixing him with a level gaze. "Are you attempting to bribe me, Mr. Whitaker?" "Certainly not. I'm suggesting a civilized compromise." His face flushed with indignation. $500 to the reservation fund. A substantial sum. For thousands of acres of prime grazing land? Land that was never rightfully yours. She shook her head. "You should make this offer directly to Nakohe." "Negotiate with an Apache?" Whitaker scoffed. "Be reasonable, Mrs. Holloway. You have influence over him. Make him understand this is the best outcome possible." "I have no control over Nakohe's decisions, nor would I want such control." She resumed her kneading with deliberate strokes. "The hearing will proceed as scheduled." After Whitaker stormed out, Copper Springs began dividing along lines that transcended the usual prejudices. Some citizens, reading Samuel's meticulous research, found themselves questioning long-held assumptions. Others doubled down, insisting that ancient documents shouldn't disrupt established order. The saloon buzzed with heated debates. The church filled with those seeking guidance on matters of justice versus stability. Sheriff Callahan reported that Byron remained in custody, with Mayor Whitaker uncharacteristically unwilling to post bail for his son, perhaps fearing what the young man might reveal under further questioning. In this charged atmosphere, Nakohi gathered his children and Sarah in her small parlor one evening, his decision made after days of contemplation. "I will pursue the land claim," he announced quietly. "Not for myself, but for my people's future, my children's future." Sarah squeezed his hand in silent support, while Talasi straightened with pride at his father's resolve. Istis leaned against Nakohi's side, while Ahot, still occasionally waking from nightmares about his kidnapping, played with the wooden eagle at their feet. "It will not be easy," Nakohi continued. "Whitaker has power, money, influence. But you have truth," Sarah replied simply. "And perhaps that will be enough." 3 days before the scheduled hearing, Mayor Whitaker made his countermove. The Territorial Bulletin, a newly established competitor to Samuel Reed's Gazette, appeared on doorsteps throughout Copper Springs. Its front page carried a headline designed to undermine the growing sympathy for Nakohi. "Widow's Indian Alliance betrays husband's legacy." Sarah stood frozen in her bakery as she read the article detailing Thomas Holloway's work as a clerk for the Indian Affairs Office before his death. According to records Whitaker had obtained, Thomas had helped process paperwork relocating Apache families to the reservation, essentially participating in the system that had dispossessed Nakohi's people. "It's a clever tactic," Samuel Reed admitted when he arrived to see her reaction. "Whitaker's trying to drive a wedge between you and Nakohi. Make the town question your motivations." "Is it true?" Sarah asked quietly. "Did Thomas really work for Indian Affairs?" "I checked the records. He did serve as a clerk in the territorial office for 8 months before you moved here." Samuel's expression was sympathetic. "But that doesn't mean that he actively participated in forcing people onto reservations?" Sarah finished, her voice hollow. "What else would that position entail?" The bell above the door interrupted them as Nakohi entered. His face revealed he had already heard the news. The silence between them stretched painfully as Sarah struggled to find words. "I didn't know," she finally said. "Thomas never spoke of his work in detail." Nakohi nodded once, his expression carefully neutral. "Many men follow orders without questioning. I need to understand what he did." Sarah moved to the stairs leading to her apartment. "Wait here, please." Upstairs, she retrieved a small trunk containing Thomas's personal papers. Letters, journals, official documents she had never fully examined, too painful in her early grief. Now she carried them downstairs, placing them on the bakery table. "If there's truth to find, let's find it together," she told Nakohi. For the next hour, they sorted through the remnants of Thomas Holloway's brief life. Among various documents, they discovered a thin journal containing his private thoughts. The early entries showed a young man eager to establish himself in territorial administration. Later passages revealed growing discomfort. "Listen to this," Sarah said, reading from an entry dated 3 months before Thomas's death. "Witnessed the relocation of 15 Apache families today. The conditions at the reservation are deplorable, nothing like what Washington has been promised. These people deserve better than barren land and broken promises. I've drafted a letter of protest to the commissioner, though Harrison warns it could cost me my position." Further entries documented Thomas's increasing disillusionment with government policy. His final journal entry, written just days before falling ill, mentioned a plan to expose reservation conditions to Eastern newspapers. "He was changing," Sarah said softly, "beginning to see the injustice." Nakohi's expression remained guarded. "Many have good intentions. Few act upon them. He never had the chance." Sarah closed the journal gently. The fever took him before he could make amends. That evening, as word of the bulletin's accusations spread, visitors arrived at Sarah's door, some offering support, others thinly veiled condemnation. Reverend Clark came with practical advice. "Whitaker's desperate," he observed. He's trying to undermine public support before the hearing. You must decide how to respond." After he left, Sarah and Nakohi sat in strained silence on her back porch. The revelations about Thomas hung between them, creating the first real barrier in their relationship. "What Thomas did or didn't do before he died doesn't change who I am," Sarah finally said. "Or what I believe is right." "No," Nakohi agreed. "But it explains something I have wondered." "What's that?" "Why a woman like you would risk everything for someone like me." His eyes held no accusation, only a question. "Perhaps it is guilt that drives your kindness." The suggestion stung, but Sarah forced herself to consider it honestly. Was her support for Nakohi somehow an attempt to atone for Thomas's actions? Had she been trying to balance some cosmic scale? "When I first helped you in that courtroom," she said carefully, "I knew nothing of Thomas's work. I acted because a man was about to hang for feeding his children. Everything since has been because I came to know you, to respect you." She met his gaze directly. "To care for you and your children." Nakohi nodded slowly, weighing her words. "Then we face Whitaker together, without shadows between us." "Together," Sarah agreed, though uncertainty lingered in both their hearts. The courthouse overflowed on the day of the hearing. People stood shoulder to shoulder, filling every available space, with more crowded outside the windows. Judge Hamilton had donned his most formal attire, his expression grave as he called the proceedings to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "This court will now hear evidence regarding land claim dispute Nakohi versus Whitaker," he announced. "I remind all present that this is a formal legal proceeding. Disruptions will not be tolerated." Mayor Whitaker sat at one table, flanked by 2 lawyers brought in from Santa Fe. His usual bluster had been replaced by cool calculation. Across the aisle, Nakohi sat alone. Samuel Reed had offered to speak for him, but Nakohi had insisted on representing himself. Sarah, seated directly behind him, leaned forward to squeeze his shoulder in silent support. "Mayor Whitaker, as the current deed holder, you may present your case first," Judge Hamilton directed. Whitaker's lead attorney rose, a slick man named Hargrove with a voice cultivated to impress. "Your Honor, this frivolous claim attempts to invalidate nearly 4 decades of legitimate ownership based on a clerical oversight from before the war. The Whitaker family has developed this land, paid taxes on it, and contributed to territorial prosperity. To seize it now based on a technicality would be a grave injustice." For the next hour, witnesses paraded forward attesting to Whitaker's character, his father's contributions to the town's founding, and the economic importance of his ranch. Former territorial officials testified that the governor had full authority to reassign reservation boundaries during times of Indian hostility. When Whitaker himself took the stand, he projected wounded indignation. "My father purchased this land legally from the territorial government in 1858. We've worked it honestly ever since." His voice hardened. "These Apache had their chance to live peacefully. Their raids and murders forfeited any right to this valley." Judge Hamilton turned to Nakohi. "You may present your case." Nakohi rose slowly, his dignity palpable in the hushed courtroom. Unlike Whitaker's practiced performance, his words came measured and direct. "In 1855, my grandfather touched the pen to sign the Treaty of Silver Springs. I was a small boy, but I remember his words that night by the fire. They have promised this land will always be ours." He unfolded the land deed Samuel had discovered. "This paper shows that promise in your language, with your government's seal." He described how the treaty had been unilaterally broken, not through proper legal channels but through backroom arrangements that benefited men like Whitaker's father. Several elders from the reservation testified, confirming the oral history that matched the written record. When Samuel Reed took the stand, he methodically outlined the paper trail showing how Whitaker Sr. had leveraged his position to acquire land specifically excluded from the governor's authority to reassign. "The federal government never ratified these changes," Samuel emphasized, presenting official correspondence. "Under territorial law, that makes the land transfer invalid." As the evidence mounted against him, Whitaker's face darkened with fury. When Sarah was called to testify about Thomas's journal entries documenting reservation conditions, Whitaker abruptly stood. "This is absurd. We're listening to Indians and their sympathizers over respected citizens." He pointed accusingly at Nakohe. "My father built something from nothing while his people contributed nothing but bloodshed." "Mr. Whitaker, control yourself," Judge Hamilton warned. But Whitaker was beyond caution now, decades of entitlement fueling his rage. "No court is going to give prime grazing land back to savages. I won't allow it." As Sheriff Callahan moved to restrain him, Whitaker reached inside his jacket and pulled out a Derringer pistol. The small crowd gasped and surged backward. "This farce ends now," he growled, aiming at Nakohe. Sarah cried out a warning as she lunged forward. Nakohe turned just as Whitaker fired. In the confined space, the gunshot boomed like cannon fire. Nakohe staggered but remained standing as Sheriff Callahan tackled Whitaker to the ground. Only when Nakohe turned did Sarah realize the bullet had grazed his upper arm, tearing his shirt and drawing blood but causing no serious injury. Their eyes met in a moment of shared relief before the courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Hamilton's gavel pounded repeatedly. "Order! I will have order!" Gradually, the tumult subsided. Whitaker, disarmed and restrained, glared with impotent hatred as Sheriff Callahan secured his wrists with handcuffs. "Your Honor," Callahan said grimly, "I'm charging Edgar Whitaker with attempted murder." The judge nodded, his face ashen. "This court stands in recess until tomorrow morning, when I will deliver my ruling on the land claim." His eyes swept the shocked audience. "And may God help this town find its way back to civilization." 1 year later, Sarah stood in her kitchen doorway watching autumn sunlight gild the landscape. The view had changed since Judge Hamilton's historic ruling, where once she had seen only the back of neighboring buildings. Now her expanded property opened onto a small orchard transitioning to fields beyond. The judge's decision had surprised many. He had ordered the return of approximately 1/3 of the disputed land to the Apache community, including the Sacred Creek and the fertile valley adjacent to the reservation. The remainder stayed with the Whitaker estate, now managed by a court-appointed trustee while Edgar Whitaker served his sentence for attempted murder. Most importantly, the ruling had established a legal precedent that prompted territorial officials to review other questionable land transfers throughout the region. "Mother, Father says the wagon is ready." Istis called from the yard, her English now fluent after a year in Sarah's care. Sarah smiled at the word mother, a title that had come gradually and naturally from Nakohe's children. 6 months earlier, she and Nakohe had married in a ceremony that blended Christian and Apache traditions, with Reverend Clark officiating while Sinopa blessed the union with sacred smoke and prayers. Their home, expanded from Sarah's original bakery, now stood as a bridge between two worlds. The bakery still operated, but with additional help that freed Sarah to teach at the small school they had established for both Apache and town children. Nakohe oversaw farming on the returned land, introducing sustainable practices that produced surprising abundance even in the harsh climate. Outside, Nakohe secured the last crate in the wagon. The Harvest Festival, another innovation of the past year, would begin at noon, bringing together reservation families and townspeople who had gradually overcome generations of mistrust. "Not everyone has changed their minds," Samuel Reed had cautioned when they proposed the festival. He was right, of course. Some families had left Copper Springs rather than accept the new order. Others maintained their distance while grudgingly acknowledging the economic benefits the partnership had brought to the region. Talasi emerged from the barn leading their horses. At 13, he stood taller now, his bearing reflecting his father's dignity and his stepmother's gentle confidence. Little Ahote followed, carrying a basket of fresh bread for the celebration. As they prepared to depart, Sheriff Callahan rode up, his badge catching the morning light. "Fine day for a festival," he remarked, dismounting. "Thought I'd ride along with you folks, if that's agreeable." The gesture wasn't lost on them. His presence sent a message about where law enforcement stood in the still-evolving relationship between communities. On the short journey to the festival grounds, Sarah leaned against Nakohe's shoulder on the wagon seat, his arms strong around her. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked softly, watching his children. Their children, laughing as they rode ahead. Never, he admitted. For my people, the future held only loss. Now, there is possibility. The festival site straddled the boundary between town and reservation land, symbolic of the new relationship being forged. Tables laden with food stretched beneath cottonwood trees. Children from both communities played traditional games under the watchful eyes of elders. Near the creek, Reverend Clark chatted amicably with Sinopa, their unlikely friendship another bridge between worlds. As they arrived, Samuel Reed approached with a leather portfolio. The territorial governor finally responded to our petition, he announced. He's approved funding for the new school building and appointed Nakohi to the advisory council. It was a small victory in the larger struggle for justice, but significant nonetheless. Nakohi would have a voice in decisions affecting his people, the first Apache to hold such a position in the territory's history. Later, as dusk softened the day's edges, Sarah watched a photographer arrange their family for a portrait. Herself, Nakohi, and the 3 children grouped before their wagon. The resulting image would capture a moment only they could fully appreciate. A family forged through crisis, strengthened by principle, bound together by love that transcended the barriers of a divided world. As the photographer counted down, Sarah felt Nakohi's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. In that touch lay the promise they had made to each other and to the children, that the future, however uncertain, would be faced together. The camera flashed, preserving their image for generations yet to come, visible proof that even in the harshest landscapes, justice and compassion could take root and flourish.